us. There's nothing else that the Internal Revenue Code gives us that allows you to buy and sell assets over the course of your entire life and never pay taxes. Some people say, well, what about my IRA or my 401k? Yeah, you can get at those when you're 59 and a half. But with investment real estate, you can buy and sell over and over and over again and never pay taxes. So if you work with like millennials, for example, this is like the perfect age for them to start investing in real estate. Unfortunately, again, it's also one of the most underused section codes as well in the Internal Revenue Code, just because the majority of people don't understand 1031s. So what is a 1031 exchange? 1031 exchange is the sale of an investment property and using all the proceeds and all the equity, not just the after-tax equity, to reinvest into new investment property. So for example, you sell a rental, and instead of paying 20 or 25% off the top in taxes, you're going to get to reinvest that full amount. So your financial picture looks completely different at the end of the day because you didn't pay taxes. So yeah, you can reposition assets throughout your entire life, never pay taxes on it. That word exchange throws people off. 1031 exchanges used to be a deed swap. It used to really be an exchange. Hasn't been that way for a long time. This guy, and I'm not going to get into this story too deeply, but this guy was a local guy born in Portland in like 1900. He challenged the IRS on the deed swap. And so the IRS eventually came up with new rules in 1991 that allowed investors to be able to have time to identify new properties. So he's really the one who took it from a deed swap to what we see today with time to identify new properties. So targeting the investor market, I love this one. God bless the first-time home buyer, right? We all love people buying their primary residences, but one word to describe someone buying their primary residences, the mental state, is emotional, right? Like when I bought my first primary residence, I was super emotional, especially after like the inspection, and it was chaotic, and I feel bad for my broker now. But at the end of the day, investors aren't that way. Investors are less emotional. They're motivated, because in a 1031, and I'll get into this here shortly, you have a limited time frame to find new investment property to reinvest into. So they're motivated. Investor clients are never going to be the clients where you've shown them every property in King County or Pierce County over the last 18 months and nothing ever works for them. As soon as investors find something that will pencil out for them, they're going to buy it. I know brokers that work with investors that specifically won't even show them pictures of the property. They'll just get all the comps and everything, estimated rent, stuff like that, because they don't want investors to even think about getting emotional. And lastly, multiple transactions. So it's not uncommon for us to see a 1031 exchange client sell one property, maybe buy 2 or 3 others. We've seen clients that sell for $1 million. They've owned a property for 40, 45 years in Seattle, big lot, sell for $1 million and put that money down on like a $4 or $5 million multifamily complex. So transactions like that aren't uncommon. Super, super common for us to see clients sell one property, buy 2 or 3 others. So not only are you helping your clients, you get paid on these transactions too. I don't say all this to tell you to get away from people buying their primary residences. That's your bread and butter. But having a little side book of investors can definitely help, and especially in a down market. In a down market where people buying their primary residences slows down, investors are sitting on the sideline in cash, waiting to scoop up properties. We saw it in 2009, 2010, 2011, and it will happen again whenever the next downturn is. If we're in the middle of it, if it's next year, whenever that is, investors will get you over the hump. Interest rates. So some investors have been locking in properties over the last few years because historical interest rates have never been this low. The average mortgage rate in 1980 was well over 15%. And so a lot of younger investors and people buying their primary residences, say millennials, for example, unless they're in the industry or maybe in finance or something, they don't understand historical interest rates. They think it's their God-given right to get a 4% mortgage every day for the rest of their lives. So a lot of investors who know better have been locking up properties. But again, a lot of investors have been sitting in cash too, waiting for a downturn so they can jump in. If you ever want to do an investor class, assuming we get back to some level of normalcy someday, if you guys want to do an investor class where we do kind of like a version of this class, investing in real estate using 1031s, we could probably do it at Best Choice or at Fidelity with my partner, Deanna Powell. But if you wanted to do an investor class where you bring in 10 or 15 of your investors, I'm more than happy to do that for you. Okay, let's look at some numbers here. A lot of clients, the common theme, if you ever talk to investor clients and you're in the 1031 business like I am, the common theme is that they all think they'll pay less in tax than they actually do. If I talk to a client or prospective client for the first time, they'll say, oh, Kyle, I'm going to pay 10 or 15% in taxes. Well, that's rarely ever the case, because capital gains is actually 15 to 20. And if you're actually if you own property in the Puget Sound area and you've owned it for any length of time, there's a good chance that you're going to be paying closer to 20 than 15. Depreciation recapture. We call this the hidden tax because most people don't know about it till they've been hit by it. So all the depreciation that you've been taking on your investment property, however long, assuming you haven't owned it longer than 27.5 years, is actually taxed at 25%. And so a lot of people say, well, what exactly is depreciation? I'm not familiar. So when you buy an investment property, you divide the value of, and we'll just use a rental in this example, you divide the value of the improvements, basically the structure itself, over 27.5 years. And so each year you can get that percentage, that dollar amount, written off on your taxes. So let's say that I buy a rental in Kent for $400,000. The value of the land is $125,000. The value of the improvements, the structure itself, is $275,000. So I divide the value of the improvements, $275,000, out over 27.5 years. That means for the next 27.5 years, I'm going to write off $10,000 a year on my taxes. That's awesome. That's like the #1 tax benefit to even owning investment real estate, because essentially the first $10,000 in rents are tax-free to me. But guess what? That's taxed at 25% when you sell the property. So if you've written off, say you've been writing off $20,000 a year over the last 10 years, you've written off $200,000 on your taxes. That's great, but that's taxed at 25%. So when you sell that property, you're actually going to write a check for $50,000 on the depreciation alone. Lastly, we have the net investment income tax of 3.8%, essentially on top of both of those. This is better known as the affordable healthcare tax. So as you can see, if a client sells an investment property, a collective tax rate of 25% is not uncommon around here. So yeah, you always want to advise your clients, make sure you talk to your CPA and get an exact dollar amount, but 99% of them think they'll pay a lot less than they really do. So let's look at an example here. We'll use a 25% collective tax rate. On the left, if we sell our rental for $1 million, we'll pay 25%, $250,000 off the top. It leaves us $750,000 to reinvest, and at a 75% LTV, buys us $3 million in new property. But that's an example where we didn't do an exchange. We just cashed out, took our time finding new investment property, and paid our taxes. On the right, the exact same transaction, exact same LTV and everything. We don't pay taxes, so we get to reinvest that full $1 million we sold for. So at the same LTV, instead of buying $3 million, it buys us $4 million in new property. That's awesome, right? Just because we didn't exchange and didn't pay our taxes. So again, multiply this throughout any of your investor clients. If they do this once, twice, 3 times throughout their lives, look how much they're saving. And not only are you helping them with the sale and the purchase, you're doing a good thing and you're getting paid for it. So after I get done explaining this example to a lot of prospective clients, they'll say, well, Kyle, in the 1031 exchange, I'm not really eliminating taxes from what I've heard. I think I'm just deferring taxes, right? And we all agree, who said 2 things in life are inevitable, death and taxes? No, only one of those is, and it's not taxes. Because guess what? Your heirs get a step up in cost basis when you die. So you can actually pass on $11.2 million worth of your stuff tax-free to your heirs right now. That's amazing. So if you have a portfolio of investment property valued at $2 million, if you were to pass away, you could pass that all on to your heirs tax-free. The taxes would die with you. So again, don't let your clients cash out of real estate and pay their taxes. Just help them exchange into something that better hits their goals. This is your job as agents and brokers. Give them ideas to work with. Loop me and let me talk to them about, this sort of scenario. But we came up with a phrase a few years ago to make sure people never forget this concept. You guys ready? It's called swap until you drop. You'll never forget it now. Exchange indefinitely, exchange forever. Don't cash out. All right, good stuff. Like-kind property, another common question I get. Kyle, I want to sell this single family rental. Can I exchange into a duplex? Is that like-kind? Absolutely. Any real property held for business or investment use is like-kind with each other. So you can actually exchange between all these things. You could actually exchange mineral rights for a 30-year lease. So if you have if your clients have a 50-year lease on Native American land, for example, and they have some sort of gain issue, they can exchange that for a strip mall or a duplex, for example. It's all treated as real property. The only thing that I've run across personally in my exchange lifetime that wouldn't qualify that you think might would be houseboats. Houseboats themselves are treated as real property. It's the slip itself, that's what's taxed as real property, that's what's exchangeable. But basically anything else that's held for business or investment use is exchangeable. Eminent domain. So I've added this one in the last year or two because it's coming up so much. Eminent domain, basically where the government comes in, takes your property, gives you fair market value because they have some sort of public works project going on. If that happens, the clients do what's called a 1033. It's all self-reporting, so it's nothing they need to hire someone like us for. I mean, they'd want to talk to their CPA, but if they have to do a 1033 because of an eminent domain issue, they have 2 years to complete the 1033, but like-kind means like-kind. So if your clients have a motel that's taken through eminent domain because of the light rail coming through, your clients would have 2 years to buy another motel, for example. It's same use for same use when it comes to eminent domain. So yeah, if your clients have eminent domain questions, I'm not an expert, but I can definitely give them a 40,000 foot view. They'd want to loop in their CPA, but something I'm more than happy to have an entry-level conversation with them on. So what is not like-kind? Essentially everything else. The big thing in our world being in your world, personal use properties. Primary residences and second homes are not like-kind because they're personal use, not held for business or investment use. Any questions so far? We good? Okay, awesome. Vacation homes and conversions. So this is actually really, really neat. And this is one of the most common calls that I get. Is clients will call and say, hey, Kyle, I heard that I can actually sell my rentals in exchange into my dream home. Absolutely. So the IRS gave us this ruling in 2008 that allows investors to sell out of their investment properties, say their rentals, for example, and exchange into their dream home. They just have to do two things first. One, rent it out for at least 14 days a year for each of the first 2 years. Secondly, limit their own personal use to 14 days a year or less for each of the first 2 years. That's it. So essentially, you may have a client that has 5 or 6 rentals in the area. They sell those rentals, exchange into their dream home on Lake Sammamish. They get some rents on it for the first 2 years, limit their own personal use. After that, they move in there, retire there, die there, pass it on to their heirs tax-free and never pay taxes. That's awesome. So yeah, we don't generally see this with like younger people with any of you guys, but you know, like retirees, for example, if you work with older people that have some investment properties, this is right up their alley, and this is definitely something to know. So if you ever want to loop in or have a call with like me and some of your clients that this may be suitable for, I'm more than happy to go over this this stuff with them and explain to them. The primary residence exclusion. So you guys should all know this, but your clients who live in their primary residence for 2 of the last 5 years, they get $250,000 tax-free if they're single when they sell the property, and $500,000 tax-free if they're married when they sell their primary residence, as long as they live there 2 of the last 5 years. And they can actually take this every 2 years. So this is why you see builders, for example, build a property, live in it for 2 years, sell it, do it all over again every 2 years. It's because they keep taking this $250,000 or $500,000 tax-free every 2 years. So your clients can do this. Many of you know about this, but what you may not know is that even if your clients weren't there 2 of the last 5 years, they could still get a prorated share of the $250,000 or $500,000 if they had some sort of hardship, like a medical hardship, financial hardship, a divorce, unforeseen circumstances, whatever that means. The IRS has never defined it, so it'd be up to your CPA to define it. But if your clients just flipped a property, lived in it, renovated for 8 months and sold it, yeah, they're not going to qualify. But if they legitimately needed to move, they should talk to their CPA, and they still may get a portion of the $250,000 or $500,000, even if they weren't there for 2 of the last 5 years. So you can definitely save your clients money. Another not-like-kind property, inventory and dealer properties. So this is like builders, for example. They don't do 1031s. This is their business, building properties, selling them. They're never held for true business or investment use. Flippers do not qualify for 1031 treatment. So if you stumble upon an investor and they ask you about doing a 1031, or sorry, if you stumble upon a flipper and they ask you about doing a 1031, you really just have to ask them one question, and that is this: Mr. and Mrs. Flipper, do you need the money from your flips to live on? They're like, yeah, this is all we do is flip properties. Then they'll never do an exchange. And you can tell them that. They need to pay taxes just like the rest of us. That's their business. But if you work with flippers and, it's like a little side hustle for them, they have their own jobs and, they reinvest their proceeds in other investment properties and stuff, then they can. They would just need to slow down. So instead of buying, fix up, and selling, they need to buy, fix up, and hold, get some rents on it, and then they're able to sell it and do a 1031 exchange. So the next common question that would come up is, well, how long do you have to hold for? So this is a gray area. We've seen clients lose federal tax court cases that held for 3 years because they basically left the property vacant, never rented it out or anything, never held it for business or investment use. We've seen clients hold for 3 months and win in federal tax court because they get an unsolicited offer, have a long-term business plan in place, and prove that their intent was to hold it long-term for business or investment purposes. So it all comes down to intent. This is one of those crazy things where you'd think the IRS would at least say, hey, here's how long you have to hold for, da-da-da-da-da. It's a gray area. They've never defined it. So most CPAs would say that if you hold for 1 year and get some rents on it, you're going to be okay. That's long-term, and you've got business or investment use out of it. Some more conservative CPAs, and I've never even met one of these people that would say this, but conservative CPAs out there, hey, hold on for 2 years, get some rents on it to be safe and remove all doubt. That being said, your clients, if they hold for 1 year and get some rents on it, probably going to be okay, but they can always confirm with their CPA if they're unsure. All right, time frames. Day 0 on the exchange, close of escrow. So that's what starts the 45 and 180-day clocks that I'll talk about in a minute. But day 0, close of escrow. So that means that you have to open up your exchange before close of escrow. This is a key thing to remember today. If this is the only thing you remember today, that's great. Make sure your clients set up their exchange before they close, because if they've already closed, it's too late. And I literally get this call once or twice a week. Someone will call and say, hey, Kyle, I hear you're the 1031 guy. I'm selling this duplex in Ballard I've owned for 20 years. I've got a huge tax liability, and I need to do an exchange on it. I'll say, great, where's escrow at? They'll say, oh, it closed last week. I'll say, unfortunately, you can't do an exchange. You have to set up your exchange before you close on your sale. They'll say the same thing, like, oh, yeah, my broker said it would be easier if I set up an exchange after I close on my sale. I will never say this, but in my head, I'm thinking that broker is about to be known as defendant, because they just walk their client into a huge tax bill. Don't walk your clients into a huge tax bill. So Just remember, have them set it up before you close. If they ask you about basic rules or anything, have them call me. Just make sure they set it up before they close on their sale. So from close of escrow, they have 45 days to identify a new property to purchase. What does that mean? They just have to let us know within 45 days what they intend on purchasing. And they can use one of three different identification rules. The first one, the most common rule, the 3 property rule. So your clients sell an investment property, they can identify up to 3 new properties of any value to purchase, but only 3. If they're selling that duplex in Ballard for $1 million, and they want to buy 5 or 6 rentals in Spokane, obviously they're going to need to identify more than 3 properties, so they can. They would just go to the 200% rule. I mean, they can identify any number of properties collectively totaling up to 200% of what they sold for. So if they sold for $1 million, they could actually identify any number of properties totaling up to $2 million. So they might end up identifying 7 or 8 $250,000 properties, for example. And lastly, if that rule doesn't work, if they want to buy a portfolio of properties and say there's 10 properties in that portfolio and it's valued at 300% of what they sold for. Obviously, the first 2 rules don't work, so they go to what I call the all or none rule. It's technically known as the 95% exception rule. The clients can identify anything they want. They just have to close on 95% of the value identified.
So Kyle,
45, yep.
Question on that I just got. So on the 3 property rule, how do the clients identify those properties? Is that with you? Is that a form that they fill out? What's the process for identifying?
Yep, very, very good question. So when the clients close on their sale, we'll give them an identification form, generally via DocuSign. Okay. And it's got a few lines, a spot to sign and date. The clients just write in the legal address or description of the properties they want to identify, sign, date, get it back to us by 11:59 p.m. on the 45th day. So it's super, super easy to identify.
Okay. So it's not like they have to show you the contracts or anything like that.
Yep, and I should have brought that up. So the clients don't have to be under contract within the 45 days, but that's smart to do because, as you guys all know very well, in this market, if you're planning on a property being there in a week or 2, there's a very, very good chance it's gone. Right. So we would definitely tell people, try to get under contract if you can within the 45 days. You just don't technically have to.
Okay.
Yep. 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. Remember, these are all calendar days, so Saturdays, Sundays, legal holidays, kids' birthdays, it doesn't matter. Nothing extends the 45 or the 180 days outside of federally declared disasters. So if your 180th day is on a Sunday, you better close on day 178 because you're not going to close on the weekend. Another one. So let me talk about extensions for a second because this is popping up now. So the IRS recently issued extensions on the 45 or the 180 days. If either of those dates fall between April 1st or July 15th, you can extend to July 15th. So for example, if your 45-day identification period was April 7th, you can actually push that identification back to July 15th. So if your 180th day falls on May 3rd, you actually have basically another couple months to close on whatever property you identified. So at this time, we're pushing for more extensions and further guidance on what was issued. But as of right now, clients that close between April 1st and July 15th have 45 days or until July 15th, whichever is longer. I'm going to skip through this. Okay, so 1031 rules. We have the time frames to consider, but really there's just 2 rules in a 1031 exchange. And this is super, super easy to remember. You just need to do 2 things to have a successful exchange. 1, buy for equal or greater value. 2, don't touch any money, like reinvest all your proceeds. That's it. That's all you have to do to have a successful exchange, assuming you identify and close within the time frames. But that's it. So some of these other rules, like if you look at number 3, that confuses a lot of people. They'll say, oh, you know, what do you mean by replacing debt on the relinquished property with a replacement property, and da 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 da. That's super confusing if you look at it. So I just say that everything else just falls into place from a math standpoint if you do 2 things. Buy for equal or greater value, don't touch any money. That's it. That's all they have to do in the exchange. All right, some mixed use exchanges. And these are super, super common. Duplex. So say I have a duplex and I live in one half and rent out the other half. When I sell that duplex, I'm going to take the 250 or 500,000 primary residence exclusion on the half I lived in, and then the half I rent out, I'm going to 1031 whatever that value is. I might exchange it into another rental, for example, or I might exchange it into raw land. But I'm going to exchange whatever the value is of that duplex, of the half of the duplex that I rent out. Next one, mother-in-law unit. Oh, that's a typo, sorry. So if you have a monster-in-law unit in back, an ADU, super, super easy. Say you've rented it out. You'd really just need to get a broker's opinion of value when you sell that property. So if I have a property and say that I'm selling it for $1 million, the primary residence, broker says, you know, the primary residence itself where you live in is 700,000, and the mother-in-law unit in back, the ADU, is 300,000. Well, I just confirm that with my CPA. The CPA will say, yep, looks good to me. And I'm going to exchange that 300,000 value right out. Kind of like the duplex. It's just part of the property was held for business or investment use, and whatever that value is, that's what you would exchange. An old Victorian, same example. If I have an old Victorian and I live in the 2,000 square foot downstairs, but rent out the 1,000 square foot upstairs to a college student, whatever the value is of that upstairs that I rent out, I'm going to exchange that value right out in a 1031. And again, I just get a broker's opinion of value. Hey, what's this worth? Exchange that value right out. So why 1031s? Common one, especially up here in the north, moving markets. A lot of clients want to sell up here and maybe buy something in Arizona that they could eventually move into when they retire, or Florida, for example. But because 1031 is federal, you can actually exchange between all 50 states, Virgin Islands, Guam. Estate planning. So this is a really, really neat one. And this is getting to be more important for everyone in the real estate industry to know stuff like this, because baby boomers are retiring by the thousands every day. And by and large, they're the ones that own the wealth in this country. So stuff like this is important for you to know. But let me give you a quick example. This is our favorite 99-year-old client story, because we had this 99-year-old guy come into our office, our Northern California office, a few years ago. And I've heard this story from like the 10 people that witnessed it. So this 99-year-old guy comes into our office, and his estate attorney had said, hey, go talk to IPX, but he had a problem. He had bought a piece of raw land, like in Northern California, kind of near the Bay Area, you know, for like $700 or $800 right out of high school, which is, you know, probably a lot of money back then. But he sat on it, never developed it, never did anything with it. But it ended up being worth about $3 million. And so his issue is that he had 3 kids, and these kids had been fighting their entire lives. And he knew when he passed away, his kids were going to fight over that one expensive piece of property. So we looped in his CPA and his broker and everything. But what ended up happening is that he listed that property for right around $3 million. So each of the 3 kids basically got an allowance of $1 million. So he could do an exchange into 3 different properties, each one being picked out by each of the 3 kids. But each one in a revocable living trust, that way they would pass through right to each of the kids, and there would be no fighting over the properties when he passed. So because the taxes died with him, he could essentially, the kids could turn around, sell them the next day, and probably take a loss once you factor in the broker commissions and everything else. So estate planning, stuff like this, getting to be more and more common every day. All right.
We had a question that came in, Kyle. I don't know if you're going to cover this in the presentation, but Can you discuss the fix-up costs on the sell and the buy side? Can they be included in the exchange when they fix up the property? And how does that work?
Yeah, good question. So repair costs and stuff, they'll add to your basis, and you can write those off as capital improvements, assuming you put a new roof on or whatever. But they're not part of the exchange, so you can't get those monies back. So yeah, if you own a rental for 3 or 4 years, say you spent this spring putting $30,000 into it to sell it. When you sell it, you cannot get that $30,000 back out. You technically could, but it would be taxable. And plenty of people do that. They'll say, you know what, I've got a few rentals, but I'm kind of cash poor right now. I'm going to get that $30,000 back out and just defer taxes on the rest. That's perfectly fine. We call that a partial exchange. Okay. But to fully defer taxes, you'd want to reinvest all the proceeds. Yep, very good question.
Lori, did that answer your question, or do you want to? Do you need an example?
On the buy side, if you buy a fixer, are you going to have to inject all that cash in, or is there some way to, let's say you did an exchange for $1 million, or you sold $1 million property, you bought something for 800 and intend to fix it up. Is there any way
Sure.
to use some of those? Yeah, you got that.
Yeah, very, very good question, Lori. So, and that's called like an improvement exchange or build to suit exchange. In a normal 1031 exchange, we as the qualified intermediary will just take title of funds, meaning the client signed an exchange agreement, hand over control of funds to us. Super, super easy to do. But in a reverse exchange or a build to suit like you're mentioning, where you need to put some money into this property, we would actually have to take title to the new property at closing and cut draws to contractors and stuff. So because we're doing that, it's more expensive, but more importantly, you can't get a traditional loan because we're going to hold title under this one-time use LLC. So you would need to get like a hard money loan, a bridge loan, or basically have outside cash to purchase a property outright. Because again, traditional lenders aren't going to lend to some newly formed LLC without any income on it or anything. So once we take title and the repairs are done, we'll deed title back over to you, and then you could refi into a traditional loan. So if you got like a hard money loan, you'd want to factor in, oh, how much more am I going to pay in interest over the next 120 days while I do the improvements? So that's something to consider, but it is definitely doable, Lori, if you wanted to go that route.
And you wouldn't be able to do any of the work yourself, or would
Correct. You? Correct. Yeah. So we would be the ones on title, and it would have to be like licensed contractors and stuff. You couldn't just say, hey, give me money and I'll do it myself. So okay. We would have to cut checks to legitimate people, but it is doable, and plenty of people do that.
Thanks.
Yep. So the reverse exchange, kind of like the example I was just mentioning to Lori, except this is when clients want to buy first and then sell second. Ultimately, as soon as they close on their purchase, they have 180 days to close on their sale. So everything's just in reverse. The big difference is that we will take title until they're able to sell their property. And again, clients generally can't get traditional lending for that. So they'll have to pay a higher interest hard money loan, for example, just to make sure that they can do the exchange to begin with. All right, Delaware Statutory Trust. I like this, and this is about the last slide. So we're going to wrap up here in a minute. But DST's Delaware Statutory Trust. This is, if you go after listings, if you're a broker that goes after listings, this is the #1 marketing tool in the world right now. I cannot stress that enough. So what's a Delaware Statutory Trust? A Delaware Statutory Trust is a passively managed investment in a portfolio of generally commercial real estate. It could be like multifamily, could be office space, could be a portfolio of Walgreens, could be an Amazon warehouse, but you're a percentage owner and you're really just paying a trustee to manage it for you. So you might be a 2% owner of a Amazon warehouse in Reno, Nevada, for example. And you're going to own this, and it's a security, so you have an approximate maturity date of when it's going to sell, generally 5 to 7 years. But say for the next 5 to 7 years, you're going to collect a check every month from Amazon because they're leasing the space from you. You own the warehouse. And so a ton of older investors, and you guys, if you work with investors, you all know people like this. They're retired, they were a Boeing engineer for 30 years, and they're sick of fixing toilets at 1 a.m. on a Thursday night. They're sick of tenants turning their houses into, a meth house. They're sick of all that stuff, but they love real estate because it's made them all this money. It's tangible. They understand real estate, but they don't want to actively manage anymore. They're getting older. They just want to collect a check every month. They can do that. They can exchange into a high quality portfolio of commercial real estate, almost like a mutual fund of real estate, where they're just collecting a check every month. And instead of their tenants being, people who miss rent every 6 months or, have some sort of issue, which seems like everyone has that, their tenants are going to be like Walgreens or CVS or Amazon, companies that are leased out for the next 20 years and are going to pay their rents, every month on time for the next 5 years that you're in this Delaware statutory trust, for example. So it's a great, great marketing tool. If you have older clients that are investors, talk to them about DST. Say, hey, there's actually a way now where you can go into a passive portfolio of commercial real estate, high quality commercial real estate, maybe even get a higher cap rate, like a higher return on your cash than what you're getting now. Many of them will say, you know what? Yeah, let me talk to someone about this. They'll talk to someone that does an investment advisor that handles DSTs, and they're going to tell you to list and sell their properties tomorrow. If you're not talking to your older investor clients about DSTs, somebody else will be. I promise you that. So I can't stress enough, solicit older investor clients on DSTs. And you don't get paid when they go into the DST because it's technically a security, so it's regulated by FINRA and the SEC and stuff. But you at least get a listing you would have never gotten before. Not to mention you will get referrals. Because older people, they network together, they go out to coffee together, and they're going to tell you, they're going to say like, hey, Lori, or, they'll talk to their buddy at coffee and say, oh yeah, my broker, Lori, actually gave me this idea about a Delaware statutory trust and da-da-da-da-da. Now I don't even manage properties. I just collect a check every month. And my tenant is Amazon. And they're like, what are you talking about? I say, yeah, my tenant is Amazon now. I don't have any more drug houses to worry about or, plumbing problems to worry about in the middle of the night. I just collect a check every month. And then they'll call you and be like, hey, what's this thing that, my buddy went into? Say, yeah, here's what it is. If you guys want more information, this is nothing we do or have any affiliation with whatsoever. But I know CPAs in the area that are also investment advisors that work out tax situations with clients with stuff like this, and they would be more than happy to send you marketing material or go over current offerings with you so you can see what they look like, what returns look like, stuff like that. But again, if you go after listings, this is the best marketing tool that you can have with an aging population. So feel free to send me an email afterwards or get in touch with me. If you guys have specific questions about it right now, I can probably answer those too.
So I've got somebody that I sold a fourplex to, and he's pretty frustrated right now with with all of the rents that are not coming in. So would that be something that you would maybe consider? Hey, a DST would be a little bit better.
So, I mean, I can't say definitively, but yeah, that's like a perfect example, Rochelle, because yeah, a lot of clients are so I'm part of the Rental Housing Association, and they're a really great organization. If you have rentals, you should definitely be part of it because they do a lot of lobbying and stuff for, investors and people that you and I would work with. But the political risk of owning around here, if you're an investor, is enormous. Like they're talking about rent caps and, all this stuff. And investors are getting out. They want to sell and get out. And maybe they move to, maybe they buy something in Arizona or Texas or Florida, maybe a more business-friendly state for them. But DSTs, perfect example, because that way they don't want to have to worry about their tenants that they have to worry about could be Fortune 500 companies that they know are going to pay their bills. You know, like Amazon, for example. If it's like CVS or Walgreens, it's like, yeah, you know, those are clearly recession-proof businesses because they're thriving right now. So yeah, you don't have to worry about tenants paying their rents. You can actually go into something where you know what you're going to get. And there's a good chance that not only is it passive and you're going to be getting rent every month, you could get a higher return too as well on your cash. So their income may go up. So yeah, with something like this, Rochelle, find out what they're getting in income.
Okay.
Talk to one of my DST people and say, yeah, you know, he's getting about, you know, 4% on his cash every year. Can you give me some examples? And they'll say, oh yeah, look at this portfolio. It's you know, it's a dozen Walgreens around Austin, Texas. It's kicking off about 6%.
Okay.
So then you go back to your client and say, hey, you need to talk to this guy because you can actually raise your income and get a high quality tenant. And yeah, they're going to tell you once they talk to them, all right, Rochelle, yeah, let's do it. Let's list and sell this property. So.
Lori, you just raised your hand. So Lori,
Yeah.
you have a question?
Kyle, what's the exit plan from the DST? Does that kind of kibosh any future exchanges?
Very, very good question. So it does not. It's fee simple property because you're really an owner of real property. You're just paying a trustee to manage it for you. So what that means is most DSTs mature in like the 5, 6, maybe 7-year range. Some are shorter. Some are like 2 or 3 years. Some are like 10 years if you wanted to lock in something longer term. But once they sell that property, well, one, you would take advantage of the appreciation in price or the depreciation in price, you know, if values went down. But you can use that. You can reinvest back into a duplex in Ballard, or you can reinvest into another DST. So yeah, that's another great marketing tool. It's like if someone holds a 4-year DST, in 4 years, you're going to have to talk to your client again and say, hey, you know, obviously, you know, this market slowed down. This is a great entry point. Why don't you come back into the market once you sell it a DST? Boom. So.
And you can do a 1031 exchange from a DST. So.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
1031 into and out of.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could spend an hour talking about these, but obviously we're huge fans because they lead to 1031 exchanges. They lead to business for us, but they're awesome for you guys because they lead to business for you. Again, you get listings you would have never gotten before with an idea like this because so many people go into them and it's not a new investment. They've been around and approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission since like 2004, but the last few years as baby boomers have been retiring, they've been wanting to get out of, you know, their fee simple property that they manage themselves into something passive like this. So a lot of cool options. And again, shoot me an email if you want to connect with a local CPA or local investment advisor that handles these so you can get an idea of offerings and stuff and see exactly what they look like, what's in the portfolios, stuff like that.
Okay.
Hey,
Awesome.
Kyle, this is Sid. Quick question. So
Yeah.
for 1030, for these DSTs, do they receive a deed to the property actually when they invest in these 1031s?
So they don't actually, they're not actually on the deed. The trust that they're part of is technically on the deed, but they're still theoretical owners of the property.
It sounds to me like a little bit like a timeshare concept. Does timeshare kind of qualify for a 1031 as well, basically?
So technically, technically a timeshare could qualify for 1031. We don't do them because generally there's not a huge gain issue with timeshares to where they would need to do a 1031. But technically, a 1031 could be seen as an exchangeable property. But with DSTs, yeah, they're not technically on the deed, but they do own an interest in the property itself in the trust. Yep.
Got it. Thanks.
Good question. Yep. Okay, so as we wrap up here, most people don't know this, but are you guys regulated as agents and brokers? Heavily, right? Deanna and her team at Fidelity, heavily regulated. Lenders, you may work with like Guild Mortgage or Fairway, heavily regulated. 1031s, not at all. And what's crazy is we're the only ones that actually control funds in the entire transaction. You guys never truly control funds. Escrow never truly controls funds. We're the only ones that truly control funds, and we're entirely unregulated. billions of dollars, like billions with a B, billions of dollars have been lost in the last dozen years or so in failed exchanges from qualified intermediaries that have lost money due to fraud, cyber theft, they get hacked, whatever the case is. And generally they have very little, if any, protections in place. They may have $1 million fidelity bond or something small like that, which is just to say they have insurance. That doesn't mean anything at all. So you have to be very careful who you work with. Most importantly, well, one, for your client's protection, but two, for your own protection from a liability standpoint. There's been cases where professionals have said, someone will go to Lori and say, hey, Lori, who should I work with? I need to 1031 qualified intermediary. And Lori gives them a list of people. And they pick the one that loses the money. Maybe the qualified intermediary gets hacked and money gets wired to the Caymans and the money's gone. And they don't have protections in place. They will not only sue that qualified intermediary, they will sue Lori as well for referring them. And that client will win. We've seen it in court before. So we're a division of Fidelity National Financial, which is why I talk about Deanna and her team at Fidelity. We're their exchange division. We do more exchanges than everyone else in the world combined. So with that, not only do they have the backing of a Fortune 500 company, we have the highest level of protections and securities, bar none. Here's our securities. You can see those down below, but there's 30 million of errors and omissions on each account. So no matter what happens, if we mucked up something and destroyed the exchange, that's all covered. So no matter what happens, client funds are guaranteed. Our fees are extremely competitive. For a normal delayed 1031 exchange, it's $950. That covers the sale in one purchase. We hold funds in a segregated commercial bank account. There's not much interest to be paid, but they will get a basis point or whatever the commercial banks are paying right now. So at the end of the day, yes, our fees are extremely competitive, but two, people work with us, and we're the largest QI for one reason. We have the highest level of backing, and we have the highest level of insurance and protection. So from a liability standpoint, the Loris of the world can always feel comfortable referring to us, knowing that your clients can never come back and sue you because we will not lose their funds. We can't lose their funds. They're held in segregated commercial bank accounts with all those levels of insurance. So the only reason I bring this up is because our competitors don't, for obvious reasons. You just have to be careful who you work with, because there's 1031 companies that are far more knowledgeable than me, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, what happens when your money's gone? That's not good. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for you. It's not good for the client. At the end of the day, people work with us for safety and security of funds. So you can always feel comfortable referring to us from a liability standpoint. But as we wrap up here, my contact information once again, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions, if you want to get in touch with someone who does DSTs, there's something you didn't want to ask, please connect with me, and I'm more than happy to go over anything with you that maybe I missed or didn't cover in the presentation.
Let me unmute everybody here, Kyle, and that way they can ask you.
Perfect. Perfect.
I'm not clear. The one question that came up from Emily was the new constructions. I told her you could do an exchange as long as the closing date is within the time frame. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So they would essentially need to spend their money within 180 days. So let's say Emily, that you sold a $500,000 rental in Tukwila, and you want to exchange that, and you want to you're going to buy some raw land for $300,000 and then put a $500,000 duplex on it. You need to make sure that you've spent an additional $200,000 from the $300,000 purchase within the 180 days. I mean, ideally, you want to be finished with the construction, but you at least need to cover the spending for your equal or greater portion, which is $500,000, within the 180 days. Does that make sense, Emily?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yep.
I And you did, if you want to speak up, this would be your opportunity to ask a quick question.
Kyle, what's the approximate cost of a reverse exchange?
So it depends on the type of property that they're doing and how big it is. Basically how much work we'll have to put into it, because we actually have to do due diligence and need like a clean phase one. And because we're taking title to this property. So it couldn't be like a chemical waste dump, for example. But generally we would say 5,000 to 6,000 or so. Granted, it could be more, but I would say for 90% of the reverse exchanges, they fall in that $5,000 to $6,000 range.
That's what I was looking for. Thanks.
Yep. Anyone else? No?
Yes, this is Emily. I just wanted to clarify. You do 1031 exchanges because it's federal. You do them all over the country?
Yep, absolutely. Yep. So I'd say good, 10 to 20% of our exchanges right now are interstate exchanges. Clients sell here and buy in Texas, for example, or Colorado or Idaho. So yeah, absolutely. All 50 states work.
Thank you.
Yep.
And just so you guys know, we recommend 3 because of Kyle's point with it's the Wild West with exchange companies. We always recommend 3, and IPX with Kyle is one of my 3 that I always recommend. So many of you have asked me that too. I mean, the pricing's all relative. You're right, Kyle. I mean, a couple $100 more or less is pretty much what you're looking at.
Yep. Yeah, it's not expensive to do an exchange.
All right, I think we are good. Kyle, I think that was a great presentation, and hopefully you guys got your questions answered. And so, one more came in. So is it 45 days extra that they get because of the COVID?
So if their 45th day falls between April 1st and July 15th, they get until July 15th to identify. So yeah, it could be more than, 45 days, assuming they fall before June 1st. But say they closed June 28th, they would still have 45 days, not until July 15th. So 45 days or July 15th, whichever is long.
Okay. Do you think that's going to get extended?
So yeah, good question. So extensions for federally declared disasters have historically always been 120 days, not this time frame thing that they gave us. So we think that we're hoping that this is kind of just to appease everyone for the time being until they, decide what the true extensions will be. And so maybe they end up being more than 120 days, or they end up being a wide time frame, not just a starting point. So we're confident that further extensions could be issued. We can't guarantee it at this point. We're hopeful.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
I think that's it. All right. Well, that was
awesome.
Right done to the minute, Kyle. That's not bad.
Yeah. Good questions, everyone. And I love talking about this stuff. So send me an email, call me anytime you guys have questions. I'm here to help.
Okay, awesome. Have a great week, you guys. We'll talk to you later.
See you guys.